August 22nd, 1945, mid-Pacific. A Japanese woman sat staring at a plate of bacon crying. Not because she was starving, though she was. Not because she was afraid, though fear had become her constant companion. She cried because she couldn't believe the enemy had this much food to waste on prisoners. Keiko Matsumoto's fork trembled above 3 strips of bacon. Real bacon. American bacon. The kind that sizzled with fat that smelled like everything she'd been told didn't exist anymore in the dying nation across the ocean. Around her, 300 Japanese women sat in similar paralysis. Nurses who'd held dying men, radio operators who transmitted lies, students barely old enough to vote conscripted into a war machine that promised glory and delivered only ash. And there, not 10 feet away, an American sailor scraped half-eaten eggs into a garbage bin, casually, without thought. That waste represented 3 days of food in Japan, maybe more. Keiko watched those eggs disappear and felt something crack inside her chest. Not hunger, understanding. Terrible, devastating understanding. How did these women raised to believe Americans were weak, starving barbarians end up on a ship drowning in abundance? And why was the truth more terrifying than any punishment they'd imagined? The answer begins with a lie. A lie so complete, 300 women would risk everything to expose it. But before we dive deeper into this moment that shattered an empire's illusions, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. This story deserves to be heard. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. If you served in World War II, we especially want to hear your story. What you're about to witness is the true story of how kindness defeated propaganda, how abundance shamed lies, and how former enemies became witnesses to truth. 2 days earlier, Apra Harbor, Guam. August 20th. The transport ship's engines rumbled to life as nearly 300 Japanese women stepped onto the gangway. Their khaki uniforms faded to the color of old bone, their faces hollow cheekbones sharp enough to cut. They moved in silence, surrounded by American guards whose very existence contradicted everything they had been taught. Keiko Matsumoto, 22 years old, nurse from Hiroshima, 3 years in field hospitals across the Pacific. 3 years watching boys die, whispering bonsai, believing their deaths meant something. Her brother Takeshi among them. Iwo Jima, March 1945. 19 years old when the island took him. His last letter burned into her memory. If I die, know it saved you from barbarians. She stood 5'1", weighed 88 pounds, carried a shrapnel scar on her left arm like a badge of failed duty. She'd trained herself not to show weakness. Japanese nurses don't cry. Japanese women don't break. But standing on that gangway looking at American sailors who stood tall and broad-shouldered and impossibly well-fed, she felt the first tremor of doubt. If everything they told us about their weakness was a lie, what else did they hide from us? Fumiko Nakamura, 24 radio operator. For 18 months, she'd broadcast victory reports she knew were fiction. Phantom fleets destroyed, imaginary armies routed, American forces in desperate retreat. She'd read the scripts and known they were lies, but she'd believed the core narrative. America was stretched thin, running out of steam. One more push and they'd collapse. Now she watched American sailors handle cargo with casual strength. Watch them smoke American cigarettes thick and white and plentiful. Watch them laugh, actually laugh, men whose nation was supposedly on its knees. The mathematics student in her started calculating. If their supply lines can deliver this much to the middle of the Pacific, if their men look this healthy after 4 years of total war, if they're this casual about abundance, then the numbers we were given, all of them, every single statistic, all lies. Hana Tanaka, 19 university student, Tokyo Women's University, December 1944. They'd pulled her straight from her literature classes. 18 years old, studying poetry and critical thinking, and they'd sent her to type reports in a military office on Guam. The youngest of the group, the least indoctrinated, the most questioning. They stole my future for this, she thought, watching the American flag snap in the harbor wind. For defeat, for surrender, for whatever comes next. 5 feet tall, 86 pounds, eyes that hadn't lost their spark of defiance even after months of military discipline. She'd started keeping a secret journal the day after surrender. Contraband, punishable. She did it anyway. Someone had to record what was really happening. Someone had to remember. Yuki Watanabe, 28, head nurse. The oldest, the wisest, the one who remembered Japan before the military took everything. Her father had run a pharmacy in Osaka. Real medicine, clean shelves, people who ate enough to stay healthy. That was 1937, before the China War, before the Pacific War, before everything turned to ash and lies. She stood 5'3", 94 pounds premature, gray streaking her black hair. The other women looked to her for guidance, for strength, for the calm that came from having seen more of life than war. Something is different about these Americans, she thought, watching the guards' faces. They don't look at us like insects. They look tired, wary, but not cruel. Watch their eyes. Eyes tell truth when mouths lie. The 4 women boarded among the crowd of 300, prisoners of war, non-combatants technically, medical staff, support personnel, radio operators, students, but prisoners nonetheless. They expected execution, expected torture, expected the kind of treatment their own military had taught them to fear. What they got was a voyage into truth itself. Sergeant James Wilson stood on the deck watching the Japanese women board and tried to remember why he'd volunteered for this duty. 45 years old, Texas farm boy, 4th-generation rancher. Too old for combat, they'd said. Assigned to stateside prisoner of war operations. Guard duty, easy work. He'd volunteered specifically for Japanese POW detail. Wanted it, requested it, because his nephew Jimmy Jr. fighted at Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941, 19 years old, just like these women's brothers, just like Japan's sons. Jim stood 6'2", 190 pounds, weathered face and cowboy build, and he'd boarded this ship wanting revenge. Some small piece of justice. A chance to make the enemy feel even a fraction of what Jimmy's mother felt when the telegram arrived. But looking at these women, actually looking at them, skeletal frames, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much, fear radiating off them in waves. Jesus, he thought, they're terrified, actually terrified. What did their government tell them about us? The captain had been clear in the briefing. These women are non-combatants. Medical staff support personnel. Treat them humanely per Geneva Convention. 3 meals daily. Medical care. Clean quarters. By the book. Jim had nodded. Yes, sir. Following orders, sir. But inside he'd thought humanely. Like they treated our boys at Bataan. Now watching them board, watching them flinch when sailors walked past, watching them huddled together like prey animals. Now he wasn't sure what he felt. Satisfaction? No. Something else. Something uncomfortable. Private Danny Chen at 22, Chinese-American translator, stood beside Jim at the rail. Born in San Francisco, spoke Japanese Mandarin English. Useful in ways that made him invaluable and isolated in equal measure. They look half dead, Chen said quietly. Jim grunted. War'll do that. No, Sarge, not war. Starvation. Look at their bone structure. That's years of malnutrition. Systemic. Their own government did this to them. Jim glanced at Chen. You telling me to feel sorry for them? I'm telling you to look at them. Really look. Then decide what you feel. The ship pulled away from Guam as evening fell. 300 women descended into the cargo hold, converted to temporary quarters with bunks and blankets. They sat in silence, waiting for horror to begin. Keiko organized them by instinct. Military hierarchy, die hard. Nurses here, operators there, students in the back. Stay together. Stay quiet. Don't provoke them. Survive. Fumi counted exits, lifeboats, guard positions, calculating survival odds the way she'd calculated frequencies and signal strengths. Numbers don't lie. The numbers here said they were completely at American mercy. Hana whispered to Yuki, "What do you think they will do to us?" Yuki watched an American guard walk past the open hatch. Young man, maybe 20. He glanced down at them, made eye contact with Yuki, nodded politely, kept walking. "I don't know," Yuki said slowly, "but did you see his face? No hatred, just duty." "Maybe that's worse," Hana said. "Maybe indifference is worse than hate. Or maybe," Yuki said, "we don't know what American faces mean anymore. We've been taught to read them as monsters. What if we forgot how to see humans? 2 hours after departure, American sailors appeared at the hatch, carrying metal trays, steam rising. The smell hit the hold before the food appeared. Meat, actual meat. The women froze. Keiko stood immediately. Don't touch it. It could be poisoned. It could be a test. It could be. Her voice trailed off as the first tray was set down. White bread, pure white, soft enough to compress with a touch. No sawdust, no rice husks, no bark ground into powder to stretch flour that didn't exist. Butter in individual wrap portions. Golden, real. Beef stew, chunks of actual meat visible in brown gravy thick enough to coat a spoon. Canned peaches swimming in heavy syrup. Sweet enough to smell from 3 feet away. Coffee. Dark, rich, aromatic in a way their ersatz acorn coffee had never been. And portions. God above the portions. More food on a single tray than most of them had seen in a week. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe longer. The women stared, 300 pairs of eyes fixed on impossible abundance. Fumi stood, slowly walked to the nearest tray, picked up a slice of bread, examined it like evidence, tore it slowly. The texture was wrong. Too soft, too white, too real. This is pure wheat flour, she said, voice shaking. No additives, no fillers. This is what we used to eat. Before. She took a bite, her eyes closed. Tears started immediately. She took another bite, then another. Eating faster now, hands trembling, tears streaming down her face unchecked. That broke the dam. 300 women fell on the food like starving wolves. Because that's exactly what they were. Starving, malnourished to the point where their bodies had begun consuming themselves. And as sugar hit bloodstreams unused to it, as protein began rebuilding wasted muscles, a terrible question formed in 300 minds simultaneously. If they have this much food to give prisoners, how much do they have for themselves? Jim watched from the hatch above, watched women cry over bread, watched them eat and vomit and eat again, bodies unable to handle richness after months of deprivation. Watched one nurse, the one who'd organized them earlier, sitting with peaches in her lap, syrup on her fingers, sobbing like her heart was breaking. Chen stood beside him, translating whispered conversations. She's saying her brother died eating grass and bark. She's saying that discarded food we threw away yesterday would have fed her family for 3 days. She's saying she can't reconcile this abundance with what they told her about America. Jim felt something shift in his chest. Not pity exactly, more like horror. What kind of government starves its own people this completely and then lies to them about the enemy's abundance? Doc Jim called to the medic. Better get down there. Some of them are making themselves sick. The American medic, a young man from Ohio, climbed down with antacids and gentle hands. The women flinched when he approached. He moved slowly, speaking English they couldn't understand, but in tones that needed no translation. Easy, slow, you're safe. He gave one young woman an antacid, showed her how to chew it, waited until her stomach settled, gave her water, smiled. She stared at him like he'd performed a miracle. Jim turned away from the hatch, found a cigarette, lit it with shaking hands. Chen followed him. You okay, Sarge? Jim took a long drag. I came here wanting them to suffer. Just a little. Just enough to balance the scales for Jimmy. And now I'm wondering what the hell their leaders did to them. Because this Jim gestured back toward the hatch. This isn't victory. This is just Sam. The ship pushed east through darkness. Below deck, whispered conversations started cautiously, then grew bolder. Did you see the guards' boots? Brand new leather. When did any of us last see new leather boots? The blankets they gave us. Real wool. Not that synthetic garbage. Not recycled uniforms. Wool. The medic had actual medicine. Modern medicine. He pulled pills from a box like they were nothing. Like medicine was abundant. Like it wasn't the most precious commodity in the world. Keiko sat on her bunk journal, hidden in her lap, writing by moonlight through the porthole. August 22nd, 1945. Second day at sea. They fed us meat, real meat, beef. I haven't seen beef since father died in 1943. The portions were obscene, the waste casual, the abundance incomprehensible. If this is how they treat enemies, what do they give their own children? Hannah in the bunk above whispered down. Are you writing that? Yes. Why? Because someone has to remember. When we get home, they'll tell us we imagined it. They'll say we're traumatized, confused, broken. This journal is evidence. Evidence that everything was backwards. Evidence of what crime Keiko asked. Evidence that Japan's crime was against its own people. On deck, Jim smoked and talked with Chen under stars that looked the same over America and Japan but meant entirely different things. Chen, you speak Japanese. What are they saying down there? Mostly shock, disbelief. Some think the food is poison. Some think it's psychological warfare. Some are starting to realize the truth is worse than any torture we could devise, which is that their government lied about everything. The food, the war, the enemy, the future, everything. Jim took a drag. Think they'll believe it. The truth. Chen looked up at the stars. Would you, if everything you'd been taught since childhood turned out to be backwards? If your brother died for lies, if your own people were the ones who betrayed you, not the enemy? Jim thought about that. Thought about Jimmy Jr. Thought about what it would feel like to learn that death was meaningless. Not heroic, not necessary, just meaningless. I don't know if I could handle that, Jim said quietly. They're handling it right now, 300 women, alone, scared, and starting to understand that the real enemy wore their own uniform. The next morning brought breakfast, eggs, toast, jam, orange juice that tasted like liquid sunshine. The women ate faster now, bodies adjusting hunger overriding caution. But the confusion remained. The cognitive dissonance that comes from reality contradicting every certainty you've ever held. Fumi cornered Chen on deck during exercise period. Through halting English and his patient translation, she asked questions. Where does all this food come from the galley? They cook 3 meals daily, fresh. But the rationing, the shortages, the famine. Chen looked confused. What rationing? Lady America hasn't rationed food since '43. And that was voluntary. Sugar and butter mostly. Nothing serious. Fumi stumbled backward like he'd struck her. No rationing. Not ever. Not even during total war. She'd broadcast American starvation reports for 18 months. Stories of bread lines, riots, desperation. All lies, every word, every report. Every broadcast calculated to make Japanese sacrifice seem reasonable. She said this aloud at lunch. Said it loud enough for nearby women to hear. We were lied to, about the rationing, about the starvation, about everything. Keiko snapped. Shut your mouth, you'll get us punished. Punished for what? Saying truth, look around. This ship has more food than our entire prefecture. Hana quietly. She's right, everything was a lie. Keiko defensive voice breaking. You're teenagers, you don't understand strategy. You don't understand what leadership requires. Yuki gentle but firm. Keiko, look at me. There was no strategy, just lies. Lies to make us accept the unacceptable. Lies to make death seem noble. Lies to hide the truth that we were fighting mathematics itself. That evening, someone found a Life magazine left on a deck bench. May 1945, the pages passed through the hold like contraband scripture. Photos of America, not propaganda photos. American propaganda maybe, but still. Photos showing truth impossible to entirely fake. Factories running, smokestacks breathing, assembly lines producing. Grocery stores with shelves that held actual food. Not empty, not rationed to nothing. Full. Families at dinner tables, casual abundance. Smiles not painted on by desperation, but worn naturally by people who'd never known real hunger. And children, American children, tall, strong, healthy, teeth straight and white, cheeks full, eyes bright, playing with toys that required factories running and parents working and an economy functioning. One photo devastated them more than any other. An American boy, maybe 8 years old at a picnic, holding a sandwich, ham and cheese on white bread. He'd taken 2 bites. The photo caught him mid-throw, tossing the rest into a garbage can. Half a sandwich, discarded, wasted, because he was full. The women stared at that photo in silence. That sandwich represented more food than some of their families saw in a week. And this child, this enemy child, threw it away because he didn't want it anymore. Keiko looked at that photo for a long time. She thought about her father, dead in 1943, malnutrition and exhaustion. She thought about her sister, 12 years old and stunted, growth arrested by hunger. She thought about her mother's hands always shaking now from chronic malnourishment. And she touched that magazine photo with one finger, touched that American boy's face, and whispered we were told they were dying. But they were living. And we were the ones dying. Day 7, August 27th. Morning fog over the Pacific burning off as the California coast emerged like a revelation. The women were allowed on deck in shifts. Fresh air. Exercise. The 4 friends stood together at the railing, Keiko, Fumi, Hana, Yuki, women who'd become sisters through shared horror and now shared awakening. Jim stood nearby, not guarding exactly, just present. He'd been watching these 4 particularly: the nurse who organized, the operator who calculated, the student who questioned, the elder who observed, leaders in their way, the ones the others looked to for understanding. The fog lifted like a curtain, and San Francisco appeared. Skyscrapers, dozens of them. Steel and glass towers stabbing upward into clouds that seemed impossibly high because the buildings themselves were impossibly tall. Fumi started counting, stopped at 20, gave up. Too many. The Golden Gate Bridge, impossibly massive. Bright orange paint that looked fresh, maintained, cared for. Hundreds of vehicles crossing. Tiny dots moving in organized streams. Infrastructure functioning at a scale that made Japanese cities look like villages. The harbor. Ships everywhere. Cargo vessels loading and unloading. Cranes the size of buildings lifting containers that held more goods than entire Japanese warehouses. Industry humming at a pitch they recognized from before the war, before everything broke. This was what functioning looked like. This was what victory looked like. This was what America had looked like the entire time they'd been told it was collapsing. The city beyond stretched up hills like something from a dream. Buildings stacked on buildings, streets grid straight. Electrical lines everywhere, lights beginning to wink on as evening approached. Power, abundant power. Electricity as casual as breathing. Hana broke first, started saying no, over and over. No, 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 no. It's not real. Stage set, movie props. They built this to fool us, to break us. It's not real. It can't be real. It has to be. But stage sets don't hum with electrical power. Don't smell like diesel and fish and industry. Don't stretch to the horizon in every direction, solid and real and utterly devastatingly intact. Fumi went into calculator mode, counting ships, estimating tonnage, watching traffic flow on the bridge, calculating power consumption as lights came on. The math was impossible. This was one city, one coastal city, after 4 years of total war, 2-front war, Pacific and Europe simultaneously. And it looked like this, untouched, thriving, powerful beyond measure. If this is what survived the war, Fumi said, voice hollow, what did it look like before? And more important, what did our leaders think when they saw intelligence photos of this? What kind of madness makes you attack? This, Keiko gripped the railing hard enough to hurt. Her knuckles went white. She kept repeating, no, but quieter than Hana. More desperate. No, 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 my brother died. No, Takeshi died to fight this. We never had a chance, not ever. Not from the first date, not. Her voice broke. She slid down to sitting on the deck back against the railing, and the sound that came out of her was grief finally given permission to exist. Not crying, keening. A sound of realization that everything you believed was fiction and everyone you loved died for nothing. Yuki stood quiet, tears falling, and said what they were all thinking. This is truth. Finally, after years of lies, this is truth, and truth is more devastating than any bomb they could drop. An American sailor walked past. Young man, maybe 19, hands in pockets, whistling some tune. He glanced at the Japanese women, saw them crying, looked uncomfortable. Nodded politely. Kept walking. To him, this city, this abundance, this power, it was Tuesday. It was normal. It was just home. That casual normalcy destroyed them more completely than hatred ever could. Jim watched Keiko break. Watched this nurse who'd held herself rigid for days finally collapse under the weight of truth. He wanted to say something. Wanted to offer comfort. But what do you say to someone whose entire reality just shattered? What comfort exists for that? Chen stepped up beside him. You seen this, Sarge? Jim nodded, throat tight. They really believed we were losing, starving, desperate. Their government sent them to war against this, against San Francisco, against American industry, against mathematics and production capacity and abundance beyond their comprehension, and told them victory was possible, told them spirit would overcome steel. That's not strategy, Jim said quietly. That's murder. Sending boys to die with swords against this. He gestured at the city glowing now in the evening light, beautiful and terrible, and utterly indifferent to the broken women on the ship rail. The ship docked that evening. Tomorrow they'd transfer to trains. 3 days crossing the continent to Wisconsin. 3 more days of education. 3 more days of watching their world unmake itself one truth at a time. But tonight in the hold, 300 women lay in bunks and processed what they'd seen. Some cried, some lay silent. Some whispered to each other in the dark. And 4 women friends now sat together on the floor between bunks and made a pact. Yuki spoke first. When we get home, they'll call us liars. Fumi nodded. They'll say we're traumatized, brainwashed, broken. Hana pulled out her journal. That's why I write everything. Evidence. Proof. Truth. Keiko, last to speak, voice raw from crying. I don't care if they believe us. I'm telling it anyway. My brother died for lies. Someone has to say it. Someone has to make sure he didn't die and leave nothing behind but more lies. The 4 put hands together in the middle of their circle, a promise forming, an oath taking shape. They didn't have words for it yet, but the commitment was real. They would be witnesses. They would tell truth. They would not let propaganda bury what they'd seen. Above them on deck, Jim stood watch in the cooling night. Chen joined him after checking on the women. How are they starting to understand? It's breaking some of them, better broken by truth than comfortable in lies. Jim looked at the city lights, thought about Jimmy Jr., thought about 19-year-old boys on both sides dying for old men's decisions, thought about what victory really meant. You know what's strange, Chen? I came here hating them, all of them, the Japanese, like they were one thing, one enemy. And now I'm thinking they were prisoners before we ever captured them. Prisoners of lies. And maybe the most American thing we can do is show them what truth looks like, even if it breaks them. Especially if it breaks them. Because broken by truth, they can heal. Broken by lies, they just stay broken. The ship's horn sounded. Final docking procedures. Tomorrow trains. Tomorrow the heart of America. Tomorrow more truth than these women could possibly imagine. But tonight, 300 prisoners of war became something else. Witnesses to abundance. Converts to reality. Women who'd seen behind the curtain of propaganda and found not weakness but terrifying strength. Not collapse but casual power. Not an enemy to pity, but a nation so vast that even its mercy was overwhelming. The journey was just beginning. But already nothing would ever be the same. The train pulled out of San Francisco at dawn, August 28th. Not a prisoner transport. A real passenger train. Cushioned seats that still held softness. Windows that opened to let in air that smelled like freedom, or at least like something other than salt and fear. A dining car, an actual dining car where civilians ate meals while traveling, because in America even temporary discomfort required mitigation. The women sat in assigned cars, guards present, but not oppressive. Jim walked through checking on his charges, still not sure when he'd started thinking of them as his responsibility rather than his revenge. Chen followed, ready to translate, though fewer translations were needed now. Silence spoke its own language. Keiko sat by a window, forehead pressed against glass, watching America scroll past like a film she couldn't pause or rewind. Fumi beside her with paper and pencil, compulsively calculating everything she saw. Hana across the aisle, journal open, writing frantically, as if words could capture what eyes struggled to believe. Yuki in the seat behind, quiet, observing, mothering them all with her presence. The train climbed out of the coastal range, and California's Central Valley opened before them like a promise, or a threat, or both simultaneously. Farmland. The word felt inadequate. Farmland suggested fields, crops, cultivation. This was something else entirely. This was agriculture as industry. Mechanized, systematic, vast beyond comprehension. Orchards stretched to horizons that seemed to curve with the earth itself. Fruit trees in perfect rows, thousands of them, tens of thousands, heavy with produce ready for harvest. Tractors moved between rows. Actual tractors, not water buffalo, not human muscle, but machines that did the work of 50 men and never tired. Yuki stood, moved to the window, pressed her face close. She'd grown up in a farming village. She understood agriculture, understood the backbreaking labor of rice cultivation, understood how weather and pests and poor soil could destroy a harvest and doom a family. "This isn't farming," she said quietly. "This is food production, industrial food production." Fumi looked up from her calculations. "One field is larger than my entire prefecture." One field. And look there. Those silos. They're storing surplus. Surplus. The concept itself feels foreign. Keiko watched a work crew harvesting something. Lettuce, maybe. Or cabbage. They moved quickly, efficiently, filling crates that trucks took away to processing plants that sent food to cities that fed millions. The scale was incomprehensible. Japan had farmers. America had an agricultural system. The train pushed east. Nevada gave way to Utah, gave way to Wyoming, gave way to Nebraska. 3 days of watching America's vastness unfold. 3 days of understanding clicking into place like locks opening to reveal rooms you'd never known existed. Jim sat in the guard car playing cards with Stevens and 2 others, but his mind was elsewhere. On deck, 2 cars forward, where 300 women were having their understanding of the world systematically demolished. He'd expected to enjoy this. The enemy seeing American might, understanding what they'd challenged, learning humility through exposure. Instead, he felt like a man showing children that monsters were real, except the monster was abundance. The horror was plenty. The nightmare was realizing you'd been lied to so completely that starvation felt normal. Chen joined him, declined cards, sat looking out at the passing wheat fields. "They're breaking," Chen said quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but breaking nonetheless. Jim laid down his cards. "Is that what we want?" Chen looked at him. "Is it?" "I don't know anymore. I thought I knew. I thought showing them American strength would feel like justice. Instead, it feels like cruelty. Not because we're being cruel, because the truth is cruel." "Truth isn't cruel," Chen said. "Truth is neutral. It's the lies that came before that make truth feel like violence." Day 2, the train stopped in a small Nebraska town. Population maybe 2,000. A place so small it didn't merit a name on most maps. The women were allowed off for fresh air, supervised, while the train took on water and coal. American children played on the platform, just playing, tag or some variation, running and laughing with the unthinking energy of the well-fed. The Japanese women watched through windows and saw a different species. These children stood tall, not abnormally tall, just normal tall. The height children reach when they get enough protein during growth years. Their clothes were clean, not fancy, not wealthy, just clean. Washed regularly because soap existed and water was plentiful. Their teeth showed white when they smiled. Straight teeth because calcium and vitamin D built bones correctly. Keiko watched one boy, maybe 8 years old. He stood at eye level with her. An 8-year-old American boy stood as tall as a 22-year-old Japanese woman. The comparison wasn't just humbling, it was annihilating. She thought about her brother. Takeshi at 8 had been tiny, malnourished even then, though they hadn't known to call it that. Everyone was small, everyone was thin. Normal, they'd thought. This was just how Japanese people were built. Smaller, more efficient, requiring less food. That's what they'd been told. But watching these American children, she understood. Japanese people weren't naturally small. They were stunted. Systematically, generationally stunted by insufficient nutrition. And American children weren't naturally large. They were just allowed to grow to their full genetic potential. The realization hit like a physical blow. Hana stood beside Keiko, also watching. She saw a girl maybe 10 years old eating an apple. Red apple. Fresh. The girl took 3 bites, large bites, then looked at the apple critically. Decided she didn't want it anymore. Too tart maybe, too sweet, too something, and tossed it into a trash bin on the platform. 3 bites, then garbage. Hana watched that apple disappear and something broke inside her. She made a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob, and sat down hard on the train floor. Just sat, legs giving out, staring at nothing. Yuki crouched beside her. "Hana, breathe, just breathe." She threw it away, Hana whispered. 3 bites, then threw it away. That apple would have fed my family for a day, maybe 2 days if we stretched it, and she just threw it away because she didn't want it. Yuki pulled Hana close. "I know. I saw. How do we go home and tell them this? How do we explain that we lost to a nation where children throw away food because they're not hungry? What does that make us? What does that make our sacrifice? It makes us human," Yuki said quietly, "and them human. And the war insane, that's all. That's the only truth that matters." But Hana couldn't stop seeing that apple, couldn't stop calculating its value in Japan versus its value in America. In Japan, sustenance carefully divided, eaten to the core. In America, 3 bites of casual snacking, not even a meal discarded without thought. The gulf between those two realities felt wider than the Pacific they'd crossed. The train moved on. The children's laughter faded. But the image remained burned into 300 minds. The apple that explained everything. Day 3, approaching Chicago, late afternoon. The women were dozing, exhausted from emotion more than exertion. Then someone gasped, pointed out the window, and 300 women pressed toward the glass. "Gary, Indiana, the steel mills. Hell," someone whispered. "We're looking at hell." But it wasn't hell, it was industry, American industry, running at full capacity, at war capacity, smokestacks breathing fire into the dusk, blast furnaces glowing orange like captive suns. The mills stretched for miles, actual miles, buildings the size of cities dedicated to one purpose only: making steel, making it in quantities that dwarfed comprehension. Chen moved through the car, explaining because someone had to speak the words even if words couldn't capture the scale. Those mills run 24 hours, 3 shifts, 8 hours each. They've run that way for 4 years straight, through the entire war, making steel for ships and tanks and aircraft and buildings and bridges and everything a nation at war requires. Fumi stood, pulled out her paper, started calculating. Her hands shook, but the numbers steadied her. Numbers never lied. Numbers were clean and pure and true. If those mills ran full capacity for 4 years, she said, voice gaining strength, 3 shifts daily, 365 days per year. She wrote rapidly, checking figures, rechecking, because she needed to be certain. Just these mills alone produced more steel than... She stopped, recalculated, checked again. More steel than all of Japan's mills combined. In our entire history, the car went silent. She continued, voice breaking now, but pushing through. They built 96,000 aircraft. We built 28,000. They built 2,600 warships. We built 540. Oil. They had 1.8 billion barrels. We had 33 million. For every barrel we refined, they produced 54. The numbers sat in the air like physical objects. Heavy, undeniable. Mathematical proof of the impossible war. We never could have won, Fumi said, and the words fell like stones into still water. Not in 1940, not in 1981 when we started. The numbers were never there. We were fighting mathematics itself. And mathematics doesn't care about spirit or courage or sacrifice. Mathematics just is. Keiko stood suddenly, chair scraping. Her face had gone white. "You're saying it was all meaningless? Every death, every sacrifice, Takeshi died for nothing." Fumi turned to face her. "I'm saying Takeshi died because someone who understood these numbers decided his life was worth spending on an impossible goal. I'm saying leadership knew these numbers. Had to know. Intelligence services exist for this reason, and they looked at these numbers and sent boys anyway. Not because they thought we could win," Hana said quietly, understanding dawning, "because admitting we couldn't win would mean admitting the war was a mistake, and admitting mistakes would mean losing power. So they spent lives to buy time, to buy face, to maintain control." Yuki closed her eyes. Every death after Pearl Harbor was negotiable. Every death after Midway was probably unnecessary. Every death after 1943 was definitely murder. They knew we'd lost, and they kept fighting anyway. The train pushed on toward Chicago. Behind them, the steel mills glowed in the gathering dark, breathing smoke and fire and raw industrial power. The mills that had won the war before the first shot was fired. The mills that had made American victory inevitable. The mills that proved spirit couldn't overcome production capacity. Jim stood in the connecting passage between cars, watching through the window as 300 women processed the death of every illusion they had ever held. He'd expected this moment to feel like triumph. America showing its strength. The enemy learning humility. Instead, he felt like he was watching something sacred die. Not Japanese imperial ambition. Something deeper. The ability to believe your suffering meant something. The faith that sacrifice wasn't wasted. The hope that maybe somehow it had been worth it. These women were losing that hope in real time. Watching it burn in the glow of blast furnaces that had made their brothers' deaths mathematically predetermined. Chen found him there. "Still think this is justice, Sarge?" Jim shook his head slowly. "I think this is truth, and truth doesn't care about justice. Truth just is. Like mathematics. Like mathematics." They stood together, watching the mills fade behind them. Ahead, Wisconsin, Camp McCoy, where the education would continue, where abundance would become routine, where the enemy would learn that mercy could be more devastating than any cruelty. Because cruelty could be endured. Cruelty could be resisted. Cruelty confirmed what you'd been taught about your enemy. But mercy, kindness, casual abundance offered without thought of return, that broke something deeper than bones. That broke certainty itself. The train rolled through the night. 300 women lay in their seats, trying to sleep, trying to escape into dreams that might still hold the comfort of familiar lies. But sleep brought no relief. Dreams had been colonized by truth. By tractors and orchards and children and apples, and steel mills glowing like proof that everything they'd believed was fiction. Keiko lay awake, forehead against cold glass, watching America pass in darkness. Somewhere out there, her mother was starving. Her sister was stunted. Her father was dead. Her brother was dead. And here on this train, she was eating better than she'd eaten in 5 years. Being treated better by enemies than she'd been treated by her own command. The betrayal felt bottomless. Not betrayal by America. Betrayal by Japan. By leaders who'd known these numbers and spent lives anyway. Who'd fed them propaganda while food rotted in warehouses reserved for officers. Who'd sent boys to die with swords while American factories stamped out tanks like toys. She'd boarded this ship hating Americans for killing Takeshi. Now she understood. Americans hadn't killed Takeshi. Mathematics had killed Takeshi. And Japanese leadership had pulled the trigger. Fumi sat with her papers calculating in moonlight because numbers were the only thing that made sense anymore. She'd spent 18 months broadcasting lies. American defeats that never happened. American starvation that never existed. American desperation that was actually American abundance. Every broadcast had been backwards. Every word inverted. Every statistic fiction. And she'd read them. Her voice, her complicity. She'd known they were lies, but she'd believed they were necessary lies. Strategic lies. Lies that served truth. Now she understood there was no such thing as a lie that served truth. There were only lies. And lies built on lies. And nations constructed from lies that eventually collapsed under the weight of their own fiction. Hana wrote in her journal by the dim light of passing stations. Her hand cramped, but she didn't stop. Someone had to record this. Someone had to preserve the moment when truth replaced lies. When reality demolished propaganda. When mathematics defeated mythology. Her journal had grown thick with observations. Food descriptions. City descriptions. Factory descriptions. Mathematical calculations borrowed from Fumi. Medical observations borrowed from Keiko. Wisdom borrowed from Yuki. All of it evidence, all of it proof. All of it ammunition for the war she'd fight when she got home. Not a war with weapons, a war with words, a war against forgetting, a war to make sure no one could ever again send boys to die for lies and call it noble. Yuki sat with eyes closed but not sleeping, remembering Japan before the military consumed everything. Her father's pharmacy, shelves with medicine, real medicine, people who came in sick and left healing. That was 1937. Just 8 years ago. 8 years that felt like 80. 8 years that had transformed a functioning nation into a starving ghost of itself. In America, America had fought a two-front war, Pacific and Europe simultaneously, had built weapons and ships and aircraft while maintaining civilian abundance, had fed its people and its soldiers and apparently still had enough left over to throw away. The comparison wasn't just unfavorable, it was annihilating. It suggested that everything Japan had built was a facade. Everything Japan had claimed was fiction. Everything Japan had promised was lies. But it also suggested something else, something quieter but more important, that Japan could become something different, could build something real, could create abundance instead of scarcity, could feed its children instead of feeding its wars, if only someone had the courage to tear down the lies and start building on truth. The train pushed east through darkness, carrying 300 women who'd boarded as prisoners and were becoming something else, witnesses, converts, believers in a new gospel, the gospel of enough, the gospel of abundance, the gospel of systems that worked instead of systems that pretended to work while consuming their own children. Ahead Wisconsin, ahead Camp McCoy, ahead more truth than they could possibly imagine. Medical exams that would prove their bodies had been starved systematically. Libraries that would prove their minds had been starved deliberately. Thanksgiving dinners that would prove abundance wasn't American propaganda, but American reality. But tonight on this train rolling through America's heartland, they existed in a liminal space between worlds, no longer believing what they'd been taught, not yet certain what to believe instead, broken by truth but not yet healed into wisdom, betrayed by lies but not yet ready to trust new information. They were refugees from certainty, exiles from conviction, women without a nation because their nation had been revealed as fiction. And in that brokenness, that exile, that loss of everything they'd believed, something new was being born, something dangerous, something powerful, something their leaders had never anticipated. They were becoming people who'd seen behind the curtain, people who'd hated Taylor's truth and found lies bitter by comparison, people who couldn't be fooled again because they'd learned to recognize the taste of deception. They were becoming the most dangerous thing any authoritarian system can face. They were becoming witnesses who refused to stay silent. The train rolled on, dawn approached, and with it Wisconsin, and with it the next phase of their education. The phase where they'd learned that American kindness could be even more devastating than American power, where they'd discover that mercy offered without expectation of return could break you more completely than any torture, where they'd learn that sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to an enemy is show them they were never your enemy at all, just people. Caught on the wrong side of a war started by old men who spent young lives like currency and called it honor. 300 women, 3 days crossing America. And every mile, every farm, every factory, every child, every apple, every detail, another nail in the coffin of everything they'd believed. The empire was already dead, had died at Midway, probably, maybe even at Pearl Harbor. But these women, they were witnessing the death of something bigger, the death of the lie that made the empire possible, the lie that Japan was special, chosen, destined, superior. They were learning they were just people from a nation that had lied to them, that had spent them, that had betrayed them more completely than any enemy ever could. And that knowledge, that bitter, devastating, liberating knowledge, that would change everything. January 1946, Camp McCoy lay under 3 feet of snow. Wisconsin winter had transformed the barracks into something almost beautiful. Icicles hung from eaves like crystal daggers. Smoke rose from chimneys in straight columns on windless mornings. And inside, 300 Japanese women prepared for a journey none of them wanted to make. Going home. The announcement came on a gray morning. March repatriation. Ships leaving San Francisco mid-month. All Japanese POWs to be returned to occupied Japan. The war was over. The education complete. Time to send them back to whatever remained of their nation. Keiko sat on her bunk, staring at the notice posted on the barracks wall. March 15th, 6 weeks. 6 weeks and she'd be standing on Japanese soil again, facing her mother, facing the truth she'd have to tell, facing a nation that wouldn't want to hear it. How do you go home when home is built on lies you can no longer believe? The library became a different kind of sanctuary in those final weeks, not a place to learn, but a place to prepare. To arm yourself with knowledge that might somehow make the mission possible. Keiko found Captain Henderson there one afternoon returning medical journals. The doctor looked up surprised. Miss Matsumoto, studying always, Keiko said. Her English had improved. Not fluent, but functional. Enough to communicate without Chen translating every word. I take book medical. Henderson smiled, pulled a thick manual from the shelf. Modern surgical techniques, sterilization protocols, post-operative care. Take it, use it, save lives. She handed Keiko the book like she was passing a torch. Like she understood this was more than education. This was revolution disguised as medicine. You could stay, Henderson said quietly. Study here. We'd sponsor you. Medical school, real training. You're talented enough. Keiko held the book against her chest, felt its weight, felt the future it represented. My mother needs me, I know. But remember this. What you learned here, what you saw, it's not about America being better. It's about systems that work versus systems that don't. Take the systems home. Build something new. That's treason. No, Henderson's voice was firm. That's healing, and healing is never treason. English classes intensified. Fumi attended every session soaking up vocabulary like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. Language was power. Language was the ability to read original sources, to verify information, to communicate across the barriers propaganda had built. The instructor, a young woman from Nebraska, complimented her progress. You're my best student. You could teach this yourself in 6 months. I intend to, Fumi said. When I go home, I'm teaching English to anyone who'll listen, because people who can read American newspapers can't be lied to about America anymore. That's ambitious. That's necessary. Hana's journal had grown to nearly 500 pages. Every meal documented, every conversation recorded, every number from Fumi's calculations copied carefully. Medical observations from Keiko, wisdom from Yuki, all of it preserved in cramped handwriting that had evolved from desperate scribbling to methodical documentation. She sat in the recreation hall one evening reading back through early entries, finding the moment she'd written, "They fed us meat, real meat, I don't understand why." Now she understood. Now she understood everything. And understanding was both liberation and burden. A young guard, barely 20, approached her table. "What you're writing's truth," Hannah said simply, "so no one can say it didn't happen." The guard nodded slowly. "Good. World needs more truth tellers. World kills truth tellers, only if they tell truth alone. You got 300 witnesses. That's not truth-telling. That's testimony. That's evidence. That's harder to kill." Jim found the 4 women together in the library on a cold February afternoon. They sat at a table covered in books and papers and maps, planning, strategizing, preparing for a war that wouldn't use bullets. "Ladies," he said, Chen translating, "got something for you." He placed a box on the table. Inside, care packages, soap, chocolate, canned goods, bandages, aspirin, small things, abundant things, American things, for your families, Jim said. When you get home. Won't solve everything, but might help. Keiko opened a bar of chocolate. Hershey's. She remembered the first time she'd tasted American chocolate. Had cried because it was so sweet and so wasteful and so impossibly abundant. Why, she asked. Why give us this? Jim pulled out a chair, sat backwards on it, arms crossed, on the back, cowboy style. Because 6 months ago I wanted you to suffer. Wanted you to feel what my nephew's family felt, what my family felt. He paused, looked at each of them in turn. But watching you learn the truth, watching it break you, watching you put yourselves back together into something stronger. That changed me. You're not my enemy. You're victims of the same war that took Jimmy, just victims of a different lie. What lie, Fumi asked? That your leaders cared about you, that your suffering meant something, that the empire was worth dying for. Those lies. And now you're going back to fight those lies. Least I can do is give you ammunition. He stood, tipped his hat. You ladies are the bravest people I've ever met, and I've known soldiers. After he left, the 4 sat in silence. Then Yuki spoke. We're not brave. We're just angry. Angry enough to be dangerous. Good, Hannah said. World needs more dangerous women. March 10th, 5 days before departure, the camp photographer gathered all 300 women for a final group photograph. Official documentation. Historical record. Proof that this happened. They stood in rows on the snow-cleared parade ground. American flag visible in the background. Guards standing at attention to the side. Captain Henderson and the medical staff. The chaplain. Chen. Jim. The photographer ducked under his black cloth. Hold still. 3, 2, 1. The shutter clicked. Captured 300 faces. Some smiling tentatively. Some serious. Some with tears frozen on their cheeks. All of them transformed from the skeletal women who'd arrived 6 months ago. One more the photographer called. This time without the flag. Just you, ladies. He shot again. This photo would be theirs. Personal. Private. Evidence they could carry home. Keiko stood in the front row, medical manual clutched to her chest. Fumi beside her English dictionary visible. Hana with her journal. Yuki with the farming manual. Armed with knowledge. Ready for war. That evening, Jim found Keiko alone on the steps of her barracks. She was writing in a journal of her own now. Something she'd started after watching Hana document everything. Preparing your testimony, he asked. Preparing my defense. For when they call me traitor. They will, you know. People don't like witnesses who contradict comfortable lies, I know. But silence is worse than being called traitor. Silence makes me complicit. Jim sat beside her, pulled out a cigarette, offered her one. She shook her head. You know what scares them most, Jim said, lighting up. Not that you'll tell the truth. That you'll prove the truth. Numbers don't lie. Production capacity doesn't lie. Your body weight when you arrived versus now, that doesn't lie. You're not just a witness. You're evidence, then they'll try to destroy the evidence. Probably. But there's 300 of you. Can't destroy all the evidence. And you're not just evidence. You're seeds. Plant yourselves in Japan's soil. Grow something new. Keiko looked at him. This cowboy guard who'd wanted revenge and found something else instead. What will you do after we leave? Go back to Texas. Back to the ranch. Try to remember that not all wars are fought with guns. That sometimes the most important battles happen in libraries and hospitals and schoolrooms. Will you forget us? Jim took a long drag. Shook his head. Never. You ladies taught me more about winning than 4 years of war ever did. March 15th. Dawn. The buses idled in the parking lot, exhaust steaming in the cold morning air. 300 women boarded carrying small bags of belongings and large burdens of knowledge. The guards lined up to see them off. Not required. Voluntary. These men who'd spent 6 months watching enemies become people. Jim stood at attention as Keiko passed. She stopped. Bowed formally. He didn't know what to do. Settled for a salute, she smiled. A real smile. The first he'd seen from her. Thank you, she said in careful English, for showing me what kindness looks like. Thank you, Jim said, for showing me what courage looks like. She moved on. Fumi passed, nodded to Chen. See you in the new Japan, the one we're going to build. I'll be watching, Chen said. Rooting for you. Hana paused in front of Jim, pulled out a folded paper from her journal, handed it to him. What's this copy of my testimony? First chapter. So someone in America knows the truth too. So it exists in 2 places, harder to erase that way. Jim unfolded it, pages of careful English. The story of 300 women who learned that mercy could be more devastating than cruelty. I'll keep it safe, he promised. Yuki was last. The eldest, the wisest. She looked at Jim for a long moment. You came here wanting revenge, she said. Yes, did you get it? Yuki smiled. Something sad in knowing. No, you got something better. You got to be American. Real American. The kind that feeds enemies and calls it duty. The kind that shows mercy and calls it strength. That's rarer than revenge. More valuable. She bowed. He bowed back. And then she was gone, climbing into the bus, and the doors hissed shut, and the convoy rolled away through melting snow toward trains that would take them to San Francisco. Jim watched until the buses disappeared. Chen stood beside him. Think they'll make it? Chen asked. Think they'll actually change anything? Jim dropped his cigarette. grounded under his boot. They already have. Changed me, changed everyone who met them. That's how revolutions start. One changed person at a time. The train east to San Francisco retraced the journey they'd made 6 months earlier. But everything looked different now. Not because America had changed, because they had changed. The farms still stretched to impossible horizons. The cities still hummed with industry. The children still threw away half-eaten apples. But now the women understood. This wasn't American exceptionalism. This was what functioning systems produced. Systems that could be learned, copied, adapted. Built in Japan if anyone had the courage to try me. Keiko watched the landscape scroll past and made plans. A clinic, small at first, free for those who couldn't pay, using American sterilization techniques, American medicines when she could get them. Proof that modern medicine worked better than traditional methods. Proof through results that couldn't be argued with. Fumi calculated. A newspaper, English language at first under occupation protection, then bilingual, then Japanese with English sources cited. Building bridges, making lies harder to tell when readers could verify information themselves. Hana wrote, expanding her journal into something publishable. Not a diary, a documentary. Factual, undeniable. Names and dates and numbers and photographs. Evidence that would survive even if she didn't. Yuki Plan, a farming cooperative, teaching modern techniques from the American manual, proving that Japan didn't have to starve. That abundance was possible with the right knowledge. That children could grow tall if given the chance. San Francisco appeared through morning fog on March 20th. The city still stood, still thrived, still breathed electrical power and industrial confidence. But this time, instead of destroying them, it inspired them. If they can build this, Fumi said quietly, we can too. Not the same, but something real. The ship USS General Simon Buckner waited at the dock, the same ship that would carry them home. But they weren't the same women who'd left Japan 8 months ago. They'd been remade, reforged, transformed by truth into something their government hadn't anticipated. Witnesses who couldn't be silenced because they'd seen too much to ever look away. The night before departure, the women were allowed one final evening in San Francisco. Grace Chen's replacement as primary interpreter organized a supervised visit to the city. A farewell to America. A last chance to see what possibility looked like. They walked through downtown, past department stores with window displays that would feed a village, past grocery stores with produce sections that looked like gardens of Eden, past restaurants where people ate meals that cost more than monthly wages in Japan. In a small park, they stopped to rest. Children played on swings, mothers watched from benches. Normal life, peaceful life, abundant life. An elderly woman approached Yuki, noticed her worn clothing, her obvious foreignness, asked in English if she was okay. Grace translated. Yuki nodded. We are Japanese. Prisoners. Going home tomorrow. The woman's face softened. Oh, honey, were you treated well? Better than we deserved, Yuki said. Better than our own nation treated us. The woman didn't understand the weight of those words, but she reached into her purse, pulled out a $20 bill. For your family, when you get home. Buy food, buy medicine, whatever you need. Yuki tried to refuse. The woman insisted. Pressed the money into Yuki's hand, closed her fingers around it. Tell them America wants peace, the woman said. Real peace. Not just no war. Peace where everyone has enough. Yuki bowed, deeper than necessary. This stranger's generosity was the final lesson, the last proof that everything they'd been taught was backwards. Americans weren't demons. They were just people who'd built systems that produced enough for generosity to be casual. That's what we have to build, Yuki said to the others as they walked away. Not American systems exactly. Japanese systems that produce enough for generosity, enough for waste, enough for children to grow tall, and mothers to stop shaking from hunger. The ship departed March 21st at dawn. The four friends stood at the rail watching the Golden Gate Bridge recede, watching America disappear into morning fog, taking with them books and soap and chocolate and $20 bills and medical manuals and farming techniques and the dangerous knowledge that another way was possible. The Pacific crossing took 12 days. Longer than the eastward journey because they traveled with cargo ships with supply convoys heading to occupied Japan. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. American ships bringing food to feed the nation that had tried to destroy America. Keiko spent the voyage studying her medical manual, memorizing procedures, drawing diagrams, preparing to practice medicine the way Henderson had taught her. Modern medicine, evidence-based medicine, medicine that saved lives instead of accepting death as inevitable. Fumi practiced English with grace, discussed journalism, ethics, how to tell truth in ways that couldn't be dismissed as opinion, how to build credibility, how to create a newspaper that people trusted more than government pronouncements. Hana edited her journal. 500 pages condensed to 300. The essential story, the undeniable testimony. She'd need to find a publisher, probably an American publisher first under occupation protection, then translate it back to Japanese. Truth boomeranging home through the enemy's printing presses. Yuki calculated crop yields, drew plans for cooperative farming, made lists of families who might join, who might risk trying American methods, who might be desperate enough to embrace change. On the 8th day, Japan appeared on the horizon. Not the Japan they'd left, a different Japan. Defeated Japan, occupied Japan. Japan stripped of lies and waiting to be rebuilt on truth or new lies depending on who won the coming battle. The women crowded the rails, silent, processing. This was home, but home would never feel like home again. Not after they'd seen what else was possible. April 2nd, 1946, Yokohama Harbor. The ship docked at noon under gray skies that matched the gray ruins of the city. American ships crowded the harbor. American flags flew from buildings. American soldiers walked the docks like they owned them, because they did own them, because Japan had gambled everything and lost. 300 women filed down the gangway into a nation they no longer recognized. Or maybe a nation they were finally seeing clearly for the first time. Processing took hours. American officials documenting return. Japanese officials documenting shame. Because that's what these women were to the Japanese bureaucracy. Shame. Evidence of defeat. Prisoners who'd survived instead of choosing honor death. But the women no longer cared about honor. They cared about truth. And truth was more important than honor. Truth was the only thing that might save Japan from repeating this mistake. Families waited in a cordoned area. Some families. Many women had no one. Families dead. Families too ashamed. Families who disowned their captured daughters as if disappearing them could erase the defeat. Keiko scanned the crowd. There, her mother, skeletal, ancient, 50 years old but looking 70, her sister beside her, 12 years old and tiny. So tiny that American children half her age stood taller. Keiko ran to them, dropped her bag, wrapped her arms around her mother, who felt like bone and paper and nothing else. "Mother, Mother, I'm home," her mother sobbed. "Keiko, my Keiko, you're so..." Fat Keiko pulled back, looked at her mother's confusion. "I'm healthy, Mother. This is what healthy looks like. And I'm going to make you healthy too. Both of you, I learned how." Fumi stood alone in the processing area, watching other reunions. Her family wasn't coming. She knew that, had known it since her brother's letter. Disowned, erased, the shame too great to bear. Then she saw him, her brother, 15 years old and trying to look brave, trying to look like he wasn't terrified of being seen here. "Nissan," he called quietly. "Sister." Fumi crossed the space between them, hugged him hard enough to hurt. "You came. You risked. Family is idiots," he said. "But I'm not family anymore. I'm your brother. There's a difference." She laughed, cried, pulled back to look at him, so thin, so young, so old in the eyes. "You're coming with me. Where I go, you go. I need an assistant, someone who can read English, someone who isn't afraid of truth." "I'm terrified of truth." "Good. That means you're smart enough to respect it." Hana found her university friend in the crowd, Michiko, still alive, still working for occupation forces, still surviving in a nation that made survival harder than it needed to be. They hugged, cried, held each other like lifelines. "Is it true?" Michiko whispered. "What they say about the camps, the food?" "The treatment." Hana pulled back, looked her friend in the eyes. "Worse than what they say." Because what they say sounds like lies. But it was all true. Every impossible bit of it. She handed Michiko a copy of her journal. First 3 chapters. Read it. When you're ready, help me publish it. Under occupation, press first. We'll need American protection. Michiko held the journal like it was explosive. This could get you killed. Only if I'm alone. But I'm not alone. I have 300 witnesses, and I have you, and I have truth. That's armor enough. Yuki's reunion was quietest. Her sister-in-law, her nephew, both alive but barely, both carrying the weight of surviving what killed so many others. Aunt Yuki, her nephew, whispered, "Are the stories true? Do Americans really have so much food they throw it away?" Yuki knelt in front of him, eye level, held his thin shoulders. "Yes, and I'm going to teach you how to grow that much food. How to make Japan a place where children throw away apples because they're full. Not a place where children dream about apples they'll never taste." The boy's eyes widened. "That's possible. Everything is possible. I learned that in America. I learned that nations aren't trapped by destiny. They're only trapped by the systems they choose. And we're going to choose better systems." The processing concluded. The women dispersed. Trains to different parts of Japan. Buses to rural villages. Walks through ruined cities. Each woman carrying books and soap and dangerous knowledge. As they separated, the 4 friends made a plan. Meet again. 6 months. Tokyo. Share progress, share failures. Remind each other why they were doing this. Remind each other that change was possible because they'd seen it with their own eyes. October 20th, 1946. 6 months after return. A small cafe in Ginza rebuilt with American materials serving coffee that tasted almost American. The 4 women gathered around a table in the back corner. Older now, harder now, but not broken, not defeated. Keiko spoke first. "I opened a clinic, small, free for children, using American sterilization techniques. The old doctors call me a traitor, but the children are surviving infections that used to kill them. Results speak louder than tradition." How many patients? 200 families. Word spreads. People trust results more than they trust propaganda. Slowly, very slowly, but it's happening. Fumi pulled out a newspaper. English language. Small circulation, but growing. I'm teaching English classes at night. 40 students, young people who want to read American newspapers themselves, who want to verify what they're told. We're building critical thinking 1 student at a time. The government watches you always, but occupation protects me. For now. When occupation ends, we'll see. But by then, maybe enough people will know the truth that lies become harder to tell. Hana showed them a book. Thin, paperback, American publisher. Occupation approved. From Empire to Truth. A Japanese woman's journey. They published it first run, 500 POWs, English only. But I'm translating it now. Japanese edition next year if we're lucky, if I'm still alive. Don't say that, why not? It's true, truth tellers die. But truth survives, that's the trade I made. Yuki spread agricultural reports on the table. 15 families in my cooperative now. Yields up 40%. We're using American techniques. Crop rotation, fertilizer, irrigation. The old ways were killing us. New ways keep us alive. Are people accepting it? Some, others call it surrender. Say we're erasing Japanese culture. I tell them Japanese culture is worthless if Japanese children are dead. That shuts them up. Usually they sat in silence. 4 women who'd survived war and truth in the journey home. 4 women who were building something new in the ruins of empire. Keiko pulled out the group photograph from Camp McCoy. All 300 women. American flag in background. Evidence of impossible kindness. We should find the others, all 300. Make sure they're surviving. They won't all be, Fumi said quietly. Some will have died, some will have given up, some will have been silenced. That's how it works. Then we tell their stories too, Hana said. We make sure even the silent ones have voices. Through us, through our work, through the Japan we're building. Yuki raised her coffee cup. To the 300, to the ones still fighting, to the ones who fell, to the truth they carried home. They clinked cups, drank American coffee and occupied Japan, and planned the next phase of a revolution that wouldn't end until Japan became a nation where children grew tall and mothers didn't shake from hunger and leaders couldn't spend lives on lies and call it honor. Outside Tokyo rebuilt itself. American money, American materials, American oversight, but Japanese hands, Japanese sweat, Japanese determination to never again be so thoroughly destroyed. And in a small cafe in Ginza, 4 women understood something the rest of Japan was still learning. Defeat wasn't the end. Defeat was the beginning of a chance to build something better than what came before. If you were brave enough to learn from enemies, if you were honest enough to admit your own nation's failures, if you were strong enough to choose truth over face, they'd been prisoners of war, then prisoners of truth. Now they were architects of a new Japan, a Japan that looked more like Henderson's America than Tojo's empire. Not in culture, not in identity, but in systems, in values, in the commitment to feed your people before you feed your pride. The cafe closed, the women parted, walking different directions through occupied Tokyo, each carrying their piece of the mission, each knowing they might not live to see the Japan they were building. But that was okay, because someone would. Someone would grow up in a Japan where children grew tall, where mothers didn't starve, where leaders who lied faced consequences instead of built monuments. That someone would be worth every risk they took. Keiko walked through Ginza toward the train station, past American soldiers who nodded politely, past Japanese citizens who looked away in shame, past children begging for chocolate from foreign troops who'd been taught were demons. She thought about Sergeant Wilson, about Henderson, about Chen, about the American medic who'd given her antacids with gentle hands, about the stranger who'd given Yuki $20 for no reason except kindness. They'd won the war, but they'd won something bigger. They'd won the peace by showing 300 enemy women that another way was possible, by treating prisoners like humans and calling it duty. That was American power. It was not the bombs, not the steel mills, not the aircraft carriers. The power to change minds by changing treatment, to defeat propaganda with abundance, to transform enemies into witnesses with nothing but mercy. Japan had lost the war, but these 300 women had won something more valuable. They'd won the blueprint for a better nation, and they'd carry that blueprint forward until it became reality or until it killed them. Either way, they'd never again be prisoners of lies. They'd tasted truth, and truth was more addictive than any propaganda. The train carried Keiko north toward Hiroshima, toward her mother and sister in the clinic that would save lives Henderson's way, toward the future she'd learned was possible in Wisconsin snow. She pulled out her medical manual, opened to a bookmark page, read the dedication she'd written on the first page in careful English, for Sergeant Jim Wilson and Captain Henderson, who taught me that enemies can be teachers, that mercy can be strength, that kindness can change the world, and for Takeshi, who died believing lies. I'm making sure no one else has to. The train pushed through the night, carrying 300 stories toward 300 different futures, but all of them connected by one truth learned in American abundance and carried home in Japanese hearts. Another way was possible, and that possibility was worth fighting for. Even if the fight never ended, even if victory looked like small clinics in tiny newspapers and farming cooperatives that only fed 15 families. Because small victories multiplied became revolutions, and revolutions started with witnesses who refused to stay silent. 300 witnesses, 300 truth tellers, 300 seeds planted in soil prepared by defeat, growing slowly into the Japan that could have been, the Japan that would be, if courage held, if truth survived, if mercy remembered from America could be recreated in Japan, one child at a time, one truth at a time, one choice at a time, until the day came when Japanese children threw away apples not from hunger denied, but from hunger satisfied. That day would come. They'd seen it in America. Now they'd build it in Japan, or die trying. Either way, they'd never stop telling what they'd seen. The truth that shattered an empire, the mercy that rebuilt a nation, the witnesses who changed the world, 300 women, who learned that sometimes the greatest victories happen in the prison camps where nobody's fighting anymore, where the only weapon is kindness, and the only strategy is truth. And sometimes those victories change more than any battle ever could.